Thank you. What a treat. That was Swan Lake Undercurrents. It was the senior project by drama dance students Liz Martin and Jessica Zacharias. Are Liz and Jessica here? Liz, okay. And Michael Lou Becker and Pete Betcher are our dancers. Thank you so much. That was a treat. This dance program or project was chosen in recognition of the perseverance of racism and bigotry in the Missoula area. It is intended to promote awareness and acceptance of all people. This project uses a reconstructed storyline from Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, as well as accessible choreography and characters to facilitate recognition of social bias and to inspire change. What you saw was an excerpt from the production depicting the lead swan, Cygnus, and the prince, two people from very different backgrounds who came to each other from a place of fear and anger, but realized their potential through peace and love. The full production will be presented December 3rd and 4th in the university's Masker Theater, and I strongly encourage you to attend the full production. Thank you so much to Liz, Jessica, Lou, and Pete. It was really great. We are so very fortunate to have talented and thoughtful members. Okay, I'm loud. I can probably just. We're so fortunate to have such talented members of the University of Montana community. We are also very fortunate to be able to welcome an individual who has contributed considerably to the national community to the University of Montana. As many of you know, Elizabeth Birch is our keynote speaker for the Day of Dialogue, and we are very pleased to have her here. It is rare to find an individual who can fully bridge corporate, legal, and political America and the struggle for full inclusion and diversity in America. However, Elizabeth Birch has done just that. She was one of the first openly gay corporate executives in the United States. As former head of litigation for Apple Computer and general counsel for Apple's software industry Apple's subsidiary, Claris Corporation, she represented the companies on corporate matters around the world. When she began her work in corporate America in the early 90s, you could count on one hand the number of companies with non-discrimination policies based on sexual orientation. Today, in part due to Birch's leadership, over 600 Fortune 500 companies have adopted non-discrimination policies, and many have established domestic partnership benefits coverage. More than 10,000 major American institutions, companies, universities, and municipalities have adopted domestic partnership benefits coverage with her help. Elizabeth Birch left Apple Computer in 1995 to lead the Human Rights Campaign, the nation's largest gay advocacy organization. She and her former HRC team are widely credited with helping to dramatically shift public attitudes towards gay Americans over the last decade. She also grew the HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, into a force to be reckoned with on the political front. She increased the annual budget of that organization to $24 million and brought its supporters, including online advocates, to well over 1 million. The gay vote in America now accounts for 5% of the electorate. Since leaving the HRC, Elizabeth Birch has been involved in many different pursuits. From 2004 to 2006, she oversaw operations at Rosie O'Donnell's For All Kids Foundation. She also hosted an interview show, Birch and Company, for Here. Birch has been a frequent guest addressing diversity and advocacy issues on a variety of television programs, including The Today Show, 2020, Good Morning America, Crossfire, CNN, and every major national news outlet. She has also been profiled in major publications such as the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Philadelphia Inquirer, and the Los Angeles Times. She forms a unique bridge between several worlds. She has worked with companies that span industry, geography, and demography. Companies like Walt Disney, IBM, Target, General Mills, American Airlines, Citicorp, Fleet Bank Boston, Target, and Wells Fargo, to name a few. But also with civil rights leaders from organizations as varied as the NAACP, Catholic Charities, the Interfaith Alliance, American Association of People with Disabilities, MALDEF, National Council of Churches, National Council of La Raza, the National Urban League, NARAL, and the Asian American Pacific Labor Alliance. In 2002, she was awarded the highest civil rights honor in the United States, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights Award. The LCCR, Leadership Conference Civil Rights, is an association of progressive organizations. She currently resides in Washington, D.C., and we are very, very happy to welcome her to the University of Montana. Please help me welcome Elizabeth Birch.
Hi, I'm so sorry for that long introduction. I'll be talking to my agency. It is so fantastic to be here. It is so amazing. I have never, ever set foot in Montana in my whole life. And it is a lesbian dream to be in Montana, just so you know. The cultural outpouring sort of is a big magnet for lesbians, so keep it in mind. Listen, I want to salute Diane Sands, who I have known for years. In fact, she was co-equal with Montana. We worked on a lot of things together, but always remotely, and we always knew Diane was on the front lines of every issue. And so, Diane, it's so great to see you. I love your president, Dennison. He's really cool. I spent time with him. He is a really cool dude. I really like him. And I want to thank Josh Peters McBride. Where's Josh? He's been a fantastic host. Dialogue is a wonderful, wonderful innovation here at the university. And, you know, I sort of entered to drums, and it takes you into a different world, but I think the kaleidoscope of what you're trying to do here is tremendous and a great breakthrough. I know it's been going on for 3 years. I think the Swan Lake presentation is really the best argument I've ever seen to shift half of the football budget over to the theater arts department, okay? Kidding, that was a joke. But it did remind me, frankly, because of the young man that looks precisely like Opie, of the death of Matthew Shepard, which happened 10 years ago. Not really that far from Montana, and certainly not that far culturally. And Judy Shepard sort of ended up becoming very much a part of the Human Rights Campaign family, and we gave her sort of a context and a platform, and Dennis Shepard as well. So it's important to remember that it's 10 years later and we still don't have a hate crimes law. I grew up in British Columbia and Alberta and Manitoba, which is partly why when I got off the plane, I kind of had this wave of that I was in the right latitude and longitude. And I've spent the last 24 hours trying to learn everything I can about Missoula and the University of Montana, I mean up close and personal, and I had no idea. Your praises have not been sung around the universe. Certainly it doesn't get better than being the birthplace of Jeanette Rankin. How cool was she? She was very cool. And it is really sad that grunge music was born here, but that Seattle stole all your artists. That's bad, but the Smoke Jumpers are great. And I spent a lot of time walking and walking and walking. And I walked through all the fields and saw sort of the path of Meriwether Lewis and studied all your bridges. And there is that image of do you say Salish? The Salish tribe, you know, kind of in the I think it was in about 1880, moving across that modern bridge. That's such a sad image, out of the prairie lands and where they would harvest bitterroot, and it'll always be burned in my memory, and is probably the best reason of all that the University of Montana works daily to try to grab and embrace diversity, with dialogue being an important first one of many steps, but an important sort of university-wide step. I wanted to just sort of set a context and let you know who I am. I literally was one of those kids that was acutely aware of my sexual orientation very young in Canada, and I just somehow felt I sprang into the petri dish as this little tiny whirling lesbian. Not that I wasn't nerdy and innocent, I was, but it was just sort of, the intake of culture, everything was always skewed. And one thing we did do, though, is we did go out often into our backyard in Canada and look for Sarah Palin and try to shoo her back up to Alaska. But what I knew is as I became a teenager is I would be crushed in the small town I lived in Canada. And so I set about to really mastermind an escape. My parents did not have a lot of money, but what I ended up doing is I got myself sort of through my wits admitted to a program where I could finish high school in Europe, North Africa, and the United States. And it is an embarrassing fact, and a lot of you students won't have a clue, but I am embarrassed to say for the older folks here, it was Up With People. But Up With People was full of like homosexuals and draft dodgers and kids from the projects. So we learned so much from each other. And I basically lived in 10 countries, really wide-ranging societies. And I really came to see that there are gay people everywhere, in every culture, even in the Medinas of Morocco. And when I came back and returned to that small town in Canada, can you imagine going out and being everywhere in the world and then coming back to this little town and just standing there? And I thought, I gotta escape. So I immediately ran away to Hawaii, and where my first girlfriend was. I was becoming less innocent, as I'm out of high school. And Hawaii was an amazing, unbelievable cultural experience. It's so sad that mainstream America has such a kind of one-dimensional view of Hawaii because it's probably the very greatest human living laboratory experiment on the face of the earth with unbelievable multiculturalism and blending and waves of immigrants all intermarrying. And everything comes full circle. It turns out that Obama was there when I was there. He was a younger man, but lived there, going to Punahou. And, his mother had been at the University of Hawaii. And so the minute I heard that about Barack Obama, everyone talks about he can't be the angry black man, he can't be this and he can't, just invoking tremendous cultural stereotypes. But what people don't understand, he's actually born of Hawaii. So he's born of a culture that is almost not understood, and his exposure in Indonesia will serve us very, very well as a nation. So he has broad Pacific Rim exposure with then real life grit that came from the south of Chicago. So it'll be a fascinating thing. I know we're all on tenterhooks about Tuesday. I know there's some in here for McCain, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit. But I wanted to just say that what's remarkable, about our times, these times, for the last several years, is in 300 years when people look back, these will be the gay civil rights years. Mostly in America, largely in Europe. Europe has transformed much more rapidly than the United States, as has Canada. But this will be the era when American moms and dads and families come to understand much better their gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender sons and daughters. I did go to Apple, and I headed up litigation there, and I was there in the heyday, and it was amazing, and I was so thrilled to make money. But then Newt Gingrich came along, and it was the largest conservative sweep in 40 years, and it terrified me. And there were about 4 or 5 openly gay executives in these states at that point. I tried to talk everyone I knew into going to Washington and to sort of take some of the tools from Silicon Valley and apply them and grow our organizations, or one of them, into a really well-resourced force. But no one would go, so I had to go. And I will never regret it. It was an enormous privilege, and we did a lot of battle. But just to tell you sort of what it felt like, just before I started that job, I told many of your faculty this earlier, I was sitting around, I was about a week from starting my job, and who comes on TV but Newt Gingrich and his family? And I'm sitting there with my new director of communications, and I went, oh my God, David, look, Newt Gingrich has a lesbian sister. And he looked at the TV and he goes, oh my God, you're right. I said, look at that haircut. She's absolutely a lesbian. And so we went about meeting Candace, but we also found many, many of the relatives of members of Congress in that era and brought them all to Washington to be lobbying their own families that were members of Congress. And we tried to set a tone that, you know, we're not out there on the margins. We were in the streets for good reason during the AIDS crisis that continues to haunt us, but we're in your living rooms. And by the way, we're right here in your offices, and we're your cousin or your son or your daughter. And it began to kind of shift the dialogue in a different direction. We were able to truly defeat every single anti-gay initiative except for one, and that was the Defense of Marriage Act. And frankly, it was devastating. It turned our very able set of lobbyists, you know, into little farmers with sticks and stones to try to stop it. It just rolled over us like an M1 tank. And the only happy thing is when I was able to go on TV, on the Jim Lehrer NewsHour, and I said to Bob Barr, who led the efforts for the Republican Party, I was able to say, you know, there's some confusion out there. Which marriage are you defending, your first, your second, or your third? And it sort of highlighted what was really going on with members of Congress that were clinging to some of the very sacred traditions that they held dear, but the hypocrisy, you know, of what was going on in that era in Congress. And I think it began to take the shades off so that gay people could be seen in context in a more accurate way, in a more fully human way. So, this is what we understand, and this is from the 2000 census, and this has been updated, this data. But let's just do a quick snapshot of America and then put it in the world context. The 2000 census showed us that for the first time, they really tried to find out where did gay people live? You know, where did same-sex couples live? They only did gays and lesbians. And they thought, oh, it'll be 15, 20% of the counties in the United States. And instead, it turned out that gay people lived in couples in 97.4% of the counties in the United States. So it turned out that God did not look down and go, gay people, get to the coasts, as we often thought. Also, it's also true that children were being raised by gay couples in 94.6% of the counties in the United States. So very conservatively, there are 14 to 16 million, very conservative number, adult people who are gay or lesbian in the United States with a 60-40 split. 60% split, more men than women. And so I applied the calculus to Missoula this morning. And what I determined is that very conservative number, it's probably there are 1,080 lesbians that live in Missoula. And this is circa like 5 years ago on the census, so we have to update it. And there's probably 1,620 men. So the real issue is if you take those 27, 20 800 individuals, many of them who live right here on campus. You put them in this room, and then you have a city council meeting, and they just sort of start to say, how are you going to be treated? What will be your destiny in terms of this country, this state, and this city? And to translate the way I think civilized society should work, I'm going to tell you a story. And it will seem like a very odd story coming out of nowhere, but it is the very best historical, societal, anthropological analysis I have ever seen of how I think any town or city or hamlet or nation should treat its gay and lesbian sons and daughters. And here it is. And some of you who are, you may have been tuned into this story, but at the Brooklyn Zoo, there are 2 penguins named Roy and CeeLo. And you can go meet them. They're still there, living at the zoo. And these 2 little guys grew up there. They were born there and grew up there, same zookeeper. And when they were little tiny boy penguins, they would always hang out together. They would play together, they would scamper around, they would jump in the water, they would swim together. They were best buddies, loved each other. They played and played and played. Then they got to be older, kind of teenage penguins, and they continued to play together, swimming, jumping, ecstatic penguin behavior with the wings, best friends. But the zookeeper started to worry. And it wasn't the sort of thing you could talk about. It was not, you didn't talk about penguin affairs, at, especially same-sex issues at these big world, zookeeper conferences. And there was some subtle stuff, under the radar. There were a couple of zebra at the Washington Zoo people wondered about, and there were other expressions, but nobody talked about it seriously. And so Roy and CeeLo grew all the way up, and they just acted like a couple. They were always cuddling up and shared everything, shared food, continued to be very close. And then one day, Roy tried to get a little round stone and put it in the nest and then started sitting on it. And the zookeeper felt horrible, knowing that nothing was going to come of the stone. And then the day came. There was a fertilized egg that got left. It was probably some heterosexual penguins off engaging in irresponsible heterosexual penguin behavior. But that egg got left, and the zookeeper thought, oh my God, should I do this or should I not? And finally, he relented, and he gave Roy the egg. And they sat on it, the 2 of them, for 6 weeks. They defended it, kept it warm, took turns. They took such good care of that egg. And then what happened is the day came when the egg cracked open, and out came a little girl penguin named Tango. And here's the most important fact. Tango grew up, and guess what? She's a straight penguin. Okay, that's it. That's all you need to know. If we could all just act like that, everything would be fine. The right wing tried to take, well, I have to say, I was out there really promoting this as a great gay story. And there was a time when CeeLo spent a little more time with a brand new lady friend, but she turned out just to be, someone that sort of hung out with homosexuals. It wasn't serious between them, and she always returned to Roy. So I know we can't define our morality, our code, our principles as a society, based on what penguins do. But there is documented homosexuality, as it turns out, in our time in over 60,000 species. So, but nevertheless, we're humans, right? So, what is the most important question, I think, in our time is, how would you address those 2,800 citizens of Missoula about what they can expect from their nation, from their state, from their community? Well, President Dennison really shed some light for me on University of Montana today in a really good way. And he said that when the lawsuit was brought to bring benefits to the university, the 4 plaintiffs right here from this campus, they were very supported by the university. And your non-discrimination policy was put in place in 1992. So that set a great tone. We're having some discussions, Lucy and I, about the whether or not there is the true force of law in one law in the state of Montana. But generally, sexual orientation and gender identity and expression are not in the Human Rights Act, which is what you would really need to give it a lot of traction should you actually have to bring a suit. So the bottom line is that you can be fired in most places in Montana simply for being gay. And if you are living in Missoula, you're part still of a little tiny community unless the larger community has embraced you. But worse than that is the fact that the United States, from a global perspective, is like watching a slug move across Australia. The United States is so slow. There is not one civil rights law or any benefits or any adjustment to the military policy. There is not one place, Social Security, tax law, pensions, nothing in the federal code that protects gay and lesbian Americans. None. Now, you contrast that. Now, here, I just want to do a little sympathy here for straight people. First of all, they're sitting there and they're trying to watch TV, right? They turn on the TV, there's Ellen. They flip the channel, there's Will and Grace. They go to CNN to try to get, political coverage. They're all gay. Anderson Cooper, they're all gay on that panel, except Paul Begala, who wants to be gay. I'm kind of exaggerating. I'm telling you, the gay people are all over TV. Every situation comedy, before it all went to reality TV, they had to have a gay arc in the story. All the reality TV, they always got to have a gay couple. That's the experience. Straight people are going, enough. I'm living in the Niagara Falls of gay people. You must have your rights. It couldn't possibly be true that you're not protected. But in fact, there's just the cultural expression that's in sharp contrast to the true laws of our land. And when you contrast all of that with Europe, and you consider that the European Union has moved dramatically in a forward direction, depending on your point of view. If you're gay, you want them to move forward. And in many of those nations today, you can actually get married. Now, the Europeans regard marriage differently than in America, and that's because when people came to these shores and certainly encountered Native Americans, but they came to set up their own institutions, there were very few people in the United States. And so the word came from Great Britain, by the way, can you make a log when you marry people and, call it the register and make sure you register everybody? And can you people just do that in the church? So a lot of the governing ministerial tasks got shifted to the church, the synagogue, eventually temples, and it got completely commingled to the point where a lot of straight Americans think a marriage license equals a religious ceremony. In Europe, they go one day and get their license, and they sort of see it as this is a license from the government. Here, I don't want to diminish marriage, but it's like a hunting license, a fishing license, a license to do import-export. It's a license. It doesn't mean anything about the union of God in the middle of whatever. It really is a license. And then they go get married the next day. or a couple of days later, and it is very decoupled. In this country, it has been so commingled that there's a lot of misunderstanding out there. And as a result, I mean, to try and climb these Mount Everests are very tough. Proposition 8 is up in California, and we'll see what will happen on Tuesday. But where Europe has moved is to a very comfortable place from a policy level. I frankly think Americans are much more comfortable at the household level with gayness, but from a policy level, you know, you can get married in Spain. It hasn't been that long since Franco. And if you're gay, you can actually get married in Spain, Belgium, the Netherlands, Canada, the place I ran away from to come for freedom in the United States. Now everyone gets married in Canada. But I am sympathetic because, I mean, obviously there is this, we're inundated, even to the point where, Lindsay Lohan has a girlfriend now. I mean, imagine being a straight person going, oh my God, now Lindsay Lohan, and all the wedding spreads, are often same sex. So we're at a point in America where we're perhaps on the precipice of the kind of change that we've been working toward for 40 years. Some people would say 50 years. We're on the very verge of those sort of breakthroughs. I happen to think those issues are very important, but we're also facing monumental issues as a country and as a planet. I want to tell you one story, though, about one exception. If you have South America that is still very uncomfortable, Eastern Europe is still very repressive on gay issues. To the point where, like Nigeria, Iran, it is legal to be stoned to death for being gay. And there are real people sitting in real prisons awaiting trial in some of these really cruel, repressive countries. But there's one exception and a very important lesson to be learned. And I found out Lucy had actually spent time in South Africa. South Africa did an extraordinary thing because of Nelson Mandela. And the Archbishop Desmond Tutu was there with him. And they were negotiating with the Afrikaners, and at the end of the negotiations, they had dealt with everything: race, ethnicity, gender, how to have a reconciliation program, one issue after another, every tough issue about the lands, about resources. And at the very end, Nelson Mandela said, "There's one more thing I want." And the Afrikaner leadership looked at him and said, "What?" And he said, I want us to put sexual orientation in the new constitution for South Africa. And the Afrikaners practically fell off their chairs. They said, "Are you crazy? You've spent most of your life in prison. This country has been ripped apart by apartheid. There is such pain, and there's such work to bring this nation together. Why would you risk it all by interjecting such a controversial, toxic issue into our brand new constitution?" And he said, "Because having drawn a new circle, I'm not about to leave anybody out." And it became incorporated into the Constitution of South Africa. And there it is, the law from the top down, and no one questions it. A similar thing has happened in corporate America in that, as Lucy described, we've had like a slow-moving grass fire with many, many hundreds of corporations adopting non-discrimination laws. And it has been probably the fastest shift in any kind of institution in the history of the country. But even while we are living during this time of a fascinating election, we're also living on a planet where there has been an acute rise in fundamentalism on 5 continents over the last 40 years, including in the United States. So you've seen very, very bold, sharp growth in religious institutions that have a simpler view, a more black-white view of the world, depending on whatever the religious expression, and it has become far more acute than we've seen in decades. And it is like scraping tectonics, these values scraping up against each other. And often, gay people and women are used as the linchpin, used as the explanation for why cultures need to come into line, with gay people being the most toxic. I mean, we have been used over and over again in US elections as the burning poisonous tip of the wedge, to separate people from their natural interests, including, look at the economy. How often have good people of Montana been separated from favorable economic policies and regulation by the use of homosexuals that, frankly, there's only 2,800 of them in one city. I mean, it's not that threatening, but it has been used over and over again. And the way Bill Moyers describes it is, he said, one of the biggest challenges in politics in my lifetime is the delusional is no longer marginal. It has come in from the fringe to sit at the power of the Oval Office and in Congress. For the first time in our history, ideology and theology hold a monopoly of power in Washington. It is the close to a theocracy we have ever come. Theology asserts propositions that cannot be proven true. Ideologues hold stoutly to a worldview despite being contradicted by what is generally accepted as reality. When ideology and theology couple, their offspring are not always bad, but they are always blind. And there is a danger that voters and politicians alike will be oblivious to the facts. So I have to say, in my life, seeing Barack Obama emerge as a gifted force was phenomenal. And I have twins that are 9 years old, a boy and a girl, and they're biracial. So our family was for Hillary Clinton, but we had to be careful because I felt that Obama may actually rise, and I frankly became very, very enamored of him on the campaign trail, although obviously, my heart was with Hillary Clinton. And at one point, Finnegan, Senator Biden's granddaughter, goes to school with my daughter. And at one point, my partner says to my son Jacob, Finnegan's grandfather is running for president. And Jacob said, Finnegan's grandfather is Hillary Clinton? So at that point, I knew we had to give equal time because frankly, my kids look like they could be Obama's kids. And just studying him, it just became inspirational to see the force of will, the gentleness, along with the steel rod up his back of strength. And Michelle, I got to know. I can't say I know Barack Obama. Michelle is extraordinary. And so the clouds started to part, a new era started to come to us, and then, pow, Sarah Palin. And I thought, how could this be possible? This is not possible. That the same country that is shedding, toxicity out of its constitution and out of its history, and having a gifted guy like Obama rise, also can love Sarah Palin as the new it girl. And I have to be really careful because I just sat in on a women's studies presentation on how, very sexist the coverage has been. But, I said, but she is stupid. I mean, she is. And the problem with Sarah Palin is we should not be goaded into not telling the truth. The woman is not bright. And I'm going to give you an example that might scare you. But here's the very best example I could think of to illustrate the gravity of this moment. In 1931, approaching the age of 65, Winston Churchill was struck by a taxi in New York. He almost died. He stayed in the hospital for 3 months, and thank God he recovered. And in 1934, Franklin D. Roosevelt escaped an assassination attempt in Miami. Can you imagine how vastly different our worlds would be today if the British had been left to rely on Lord Halifax, who really wanted to negotiate with the Nazis and try to just make it all go away, even as they sort of plundered Poland and kept moving from one country to the next? Or if Americans had pinned their future on the very famous and able Henry Wallace. Okay, he's not famous, and he was not able. He was very, very weak and had none of the gifts of FDR. I am terrified. I mean, I am so thankful the polls are rising, but there are no guarantees. And I know John McCain. I've known him for many years. I've lobbied him and tried to bring him along on gay issues, and he never came. But I'll say one thing about him. He used to be a different man. He used to be a man with what I've said is each foot in a bucket of cement, and he knew who he was, and you knew what you would get from him. And he's become like a born-again pretzel, with everything malleable, everything up for grabs. And I think he's becoming even embarrassed about the lengths that they've had to go. But I'm sorry, Sarah Palin, can I just say a couple of things, even though, is it Huddleston, the head of the Women's Studies Department? Hubble. Is she here? Okay, then I can say whatever I want. Okay, the thing about the moose from helicopters. Okay, what do we know from Canada and Montana? When the moose rushes you, you stand between two trees. What's with the helicopter? You don't need a helicopter to kill a moose. When I was little, my dad used to lure polar bears in to airplanes to fly them way back up north because they'd come too far south in Manitoba. Now they are flooding into Manitoba. They're coming from Alaska because they're so afraid of Sarah Palin. I'm telling you, to say she can see Russia, she's got two foreign countries, Russia and Canada, at her doorstep. I want to give you a little sense of the way Canada views the exposure, the grave harm that could come to Canada in the northern waters. From 1867 up until 3 years ago, they didn't put any military in the north, and finally 3 years ago, they put one submarine. That's it. That's all. There is no threat. There's nothing in that part of Russia. I mean, I'm telling you, what astounds me is how little tiny fibers can be woven into these grand tapestries that are ridiculous. Make no mistake, it is a dangerous proposition. And just as in John Kennedy's era, we are truly living in a time when we can eliminate all forms of human life or eliminate poverty from the planet. Those are the kind of stakes we are facing. And I just want to say that if you're gay and those issues are prominent in how you vote, or if you love someone who is gay, or if you just, you like the Swan Lake performance, there is no comparison between Obama and McCain. None. Zero. With Obama, you get a deep, sophisticated analysis of employment, immigration, healthcare, benefits, hate crimes laws, military, all of it on and on, deep and sophisticated. And with McCain, you get one thing, and that's that he opposed marring the US Constitution that has been amended 17 times in its history, always to expand individual rights, not to narrow them, except for prohibition that got repealed. So, I think we all take our hat off for that vote, and thank you, Senator McCain. And thank you for your service to our nation, particularly in Vietnam. It was horrendous what he went through, horrible. But that doesn't mean he should be president. I'm going to just end with something said by Elie Wiesel, who he was taken as a boy into the concentration camps, and he spent his whole life trying to reveal human evil, that it can occur, and it can occur in very unlikely settings. To the point where, we had the Olympics in Yugoslavia, and then you have slaughter, in Croatia just a few years later, or Rwanda, or it springs up on our planet too often, and we have to understand it. But what he said, and this is my way of encouraging all of you, and I know you will, to get out there and do whatever you have to do to get your neighbors to vote. Take the day off. Drive everyone on your block, except for the ones that I wouldn't want to go. No, I'm kidding. Get people out to vote. What he said is this, that in a way, to be indifferent to any suffering is what makes the human and inhuman. Indifference, after all, is more dangerous than anger and hatred. Anger at times can be creative. One writes a great poem, a great symphony. One does something special for the sake of humanity because one is angry at the injustice that one witnesses. But indifference is never creative. Even hatred at times can elicit a response. You fight it, you denounce it, you disarm it. Indifference elicits no response. Indifference is not a response. One of the greatest things that's happening in our time is an awakening of young people, of so many millions of Americans to action. And so one of the things that I love that I found that Jeanette Rankin said is, you can no more win a war than you can win an earthquake. But I think we're going to win this earthquake, but not without your help and not without delivering Montana. So thank you very much. And Josh wanted me to ask if there were any questions. Does anyone, who's gay? No kidding, that was a joke. I did that to the faculty earlier. But anything about general comments about dialogue? Good thing? Good process? Good thing do you think it should be more than one day? All right. Well, thank you all. It's just a pleasure to be here. Oh, yes. Yes.
That story that you told about Nelson Mandela
Yeah.
and drawing a new circle and not wanting to leave anyone out.
Yeah.
What are your feelings about the exclusion that the transgender community feels from the HRC?
Here's what I think, that it's wrong, that HRC should be in this position. And I think that Barney Frank completely pulled the rug out from under HRC, and HRC should have been very outspoken and screamed about it. There should have been a calculation about getting through that moment that is it's sort of the hiccup moment when you're doing legislation. And I don't know if we could have survived it, but that bill, it was not ripe. I mean, in other words, it wasn't going to become law because Bush is president. So I thought there should be a more rigorous attempt to leave sexual identity and expression in the bill. And I'm the one at HRC that got us to shift and include. I also think that we should be open to a paradigm shift, because I think we could do Title VII and leapfrog over ENDA and actually get gender identity and expression protected sooner. But it would take the leadership of the transgender community to agree to having a parallel strategy. I think that Joe Salmonese got caught, and partly of his own volition, in what was a power play by Nancy Pelosi and Barney Frank to sort of shift, to sort of give in to the fears of the Democratic Party. So just to translate, The Employment Non-Discrimination Act would, very, very thin bill, but a non-discrimination bill that would protect gay people in employment. It has no affirmative action, no necessity of using the traditional EEOC approach. And it doesn't apply to the military. It doesn't apply to religious institutions or any businesses owned by religious institutions, which I don't like. And we went ahead and fought and got a gender identity and expression in there. The reason that language is important is not just for transgender people, but for gay people. And as a litigator, I would want that language. It's not the conforming gay people that end up getting marginalized and fired, it's the non-conforming ones. So it's not just because of their sexual orientation, it's because of their gender expression. And so that language would work in a gay suit as well. So I think that what I've said to Barney Frank is you can't have it both ways. You can't say the gay community needs to lobby more, but then be the go-to guy for all your colleagues, which is what he did. He did it on gays in the military, and he did it on this. And I was very proud of him on the banking bill, and I basically think he should stick to banking and let Tammy Baldwin, take over some of the educational processes in Congress. Because I think, we can't leave it to, if we leave it to Barney and now Nancy Pelosi, we will be stuck with a two-bill approach. So that's what I really think. Yeah.
How do you expect Americans to deal with the gay community when a lot of them can't even resolve the issue of color and religion? I just find it very exasperating.
But you shouldn't be negative because, no, I'm saying that, first of all, they're not mutually exclusive. They can all happen at the same time. And they've made an enormous shift in the last 20 years, unbelievable shift on sexual orientation because their kids are sitting at the dining room table telling them at a younger age. If you look at all the data, we're up into 90+% of Americans support a non-discrimination law in the workplace. More than 50% on every single benefit. And Social Security, no one wants to give up Social Security, but they poll over and over again, yes, a gay couple should get Social Security. So all I'm saying is until you come to marriage when they have a mental breakdown, that the entire civilization is going to wither and just blow away, there's been a massive shift in attitudes, in terms of public policy. And, Obama just won. No one thought that would happen. No African American thought that would happen. Older African Americans are stunned. I live in Washington, D.C., and I'm telling you, it is causing a kind of a rebirth of hope like I have not seen. And it's amazing. And on religion, you're all, the U.S. history has always been steeped ultimately in Puritan ethics. They came in those little boats all the way to America so they'd never have to talk about sex again. So, it has a Puritan underpinning that is so powerful. But it's not the only underpinning now, and more, you're getting more diversity of expression, although the right is growing in huge numbers. So, and now they're talking about Sarah Palin as the future of the party. To do what? I don't understand. I can't, probably I shouldn't talk about something I don't understand, but I think that this country is amazing. And I think when LGBT people work on rights and issues, it's not for us. Sure, we might get some benefits out of it someday and some laws that protect us, but it's our gift to this country to ever have it get better and better and to ever expunge things from the Constitution. We're the light on the path right now in American history, and that is a gift to our country. And I'm stunned at how far. You know, one time I spoke at the Christian Coalition, the annual convention. I wasn't invited, but we rented a ballroom in the middle, and Ralph Reed went nuts. They all did. They all went crazy. How could this happen? Screaming at the Hilton. And you know what? A lot of parents came, born-again parents, and they didn't leave after. Why? They could not reconcile their love of Christ with the love of their child. It made no sense to them. And ultimately, they left confused, and that was a step forward. Among evangelicals, there are new movements now to really shift away from all this scapegoating and cultural wars into poverty, you know, and really addressing what, you know, if you're a Christian, you know, what Christ taught, you know, to really the infirm, the poor, the sick. I mean, and so I think, you know, this country's interesting. And I've always seen it a little bit from an outsider's point of view, even though I was born here. But it's a fascinating country that, you know, and it happens so quickly. Like, look at right now. Right now, we say it's 1929, but really it's the late 19th century when there was no regulation, and Jeanette Rankin fought like crazy for child labor laws and so on and so forth. That's what just happened. Everything just got deregulated. And overnight, this selfishness took over. You know, it just happened overnight. And suddenly this great, magical, laissez-faire capitalism, you know, became a noose around our necks. And that's how quickly it can go wrong. So, you know, this government needs to act, and act, you know, boldly should Obama win. That's my view, and I think there's a lot of progress. I mean, I think you're a little challenged here because, you know, you have such a white state. There's a lot of white people here. I mean, I have 97%. So in a way, you don't get all of the enriching opportunities that might come in Hawaii or in New York, or depending, you know, where you are. And in that way, that's just another great challenge, an opportunity to draw more diversity into the university. So, well, thank you so much. I'm off to shoot a moose from a helicopter.